Welcome to video notes for Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. We got a lot to do. If I go too fast, just pause me. Here we go. Causes of the Civil War. There's a ton of them. We're going to go one by one. The first one was sectional debates between two different sections of the country, that'd be North or South, over the extension of slavery. Extension is key. Not just erase slavery, don't let it spread. Tariffs, remember nullification crisis, and the nature of union. Could it fall apart? Do states have the right to secede? That's big picture. Go to number 2, real specific. A history of failed compromises over slavery. So let's take a look at these. The Compromise of 1850 has to do with California. Think San Francisco 49ers, the football team from California. They got gold-colored helmets because gold is discovered in California. Everyone goes to California. Will California be free or slave? The Compromise of 1850 says California will be free. And these other Southwest territories right here will be decided by popular sovereignty, meaning the residents of those areas will vote on it. They'll decide for themselves. There will be a harsh fugitive slave law up in the north, meaning if there's a runaway slave, it's easier to catch. And if you live in the North and you know of a human being, a runaway slave, it is your responsibility to turn that human being in, which obviously they did not like. Also, the slave trade in D.C. was banned. That's the Compromise of 1850. Here's the Missouri Compromise. See this line right here? That's the 3630 line. Anything above it has to be free. So this blue territory should be free. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act said these areas will decide by popular sovereignty. So, if they all vote to be slave, then this would repeal the Missouri Compromise. Remember, the Kansas-Nebraska Act repeals the Missouri Compromise because there should never have been a vote. It should just have been free. A political party comes out of this Kansas-Nebraska Act. We have the Republican Party because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Republican Party was created to oppose the extension of slavery. Okay, that's 2 down. Next one is battles between Northern abolitionists and Southern defenders of slavery. Well, there's no better than the caning of Charles Sumner. Preston Brooks from South Carolina beat Charles Sumner with a cane because he had criticized him personally, but also had criticized the spread of slavery. What about John Brown? He was a Northern abolitionist who tried to go to Harper's Ferry, Virginia, take over that area, that arsenal, get a bunch of guns, and have a slave revolt. That didn't work out for him either. Other abolitionists, William Lloyd Garrison, Liberator, Frederick Douglass, North Star, would constantly be criticized by Southern defenders of slavery. How about our presidents? Next one down, ineffective president leadership. They were just really bad in the 1850s. James Buchanan's considered the worst president ever because the Civil War happened on his watch, and he didn't do anything about it. Harriet Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852. It is the second best-selling book of the entire 19th century. People read it, and their attitudes towards slavery change. They become more against slavery after reading Uncle Tom's Cabin. Dred Scott decision in 1857. Dred Scott is a slave who sues for his freedom and goes to the Supreme Court, and they say 2 things. 1, you're not free. Go back to being a slave. And 2, you, the United States, cannot stop the spread of slavery. Slavery is free to spread all the way west. Hey, here's a way to remember it. Think Dred Scott, dreadful decision on slavery. Last one, it's hard to see, Lincoln's call for federal troops in 1860. Hey, we'll get to that in a second. Let's set the stage. The election of 1860, very, very important. Abraham Lincoln wins, but he doesn't win a majority of the votes. The vote is all about sectionalism. If you are up here in the north, you voted for Lincoln. If you were down south, you didn't vote for Lincoln. When he gets elected, those in the lower south, I'm talking deep south, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and Florida, say we gotta go. They form the Confederate States of America. They secede in reaction to Lincoln's election because they thought Lincoln wanted to free all the slaves. When they go away, there's a little itty-bitty fort right here in South Carolina called Fort Sumter. The United States would not give it up. This new Confederacy said, we want it. But before they did that, they said, we want a president. They elect Jefferson Davis, a former senator from Mississippi, to be their president. So with the president and with the new nation, they go off and attack Fort Sumter. The first confrontation, the first shots fired of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter. Lincoln isn't going to like that. Lincoln responds by calling to arms. He calls 75,000 troops. So watch this order. Lincoln's elected, Lower South leaves, Lower South fires on Fort Sumter. Lincoln says, we need a war, we need troops. When he gets troops, the Upper South leaves. These states in gray here, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, say, whoa, 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 whoa. If there's troops, there's no way we're getting involved. They leave. Order of events. Lincoln elected, Lower South secedes, South fires on Fort Sumter, Lincoln calls for troops, Upper South secedes. Got to get that order. Pause me and make sure you understand that order. Hey, what about those border states? Missouri, Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky. That means they had slaves, and they might have gone to the Confederacy. They might not have gone to the Confederacy. How are we going to know about that? Tell you what, man. Miss Madonna don't know. She don't know how to come up with great songs like Border States. All right, Chapter 9, Civil War. Let's rock and roll. The first big battle. Not the first shots fired. The first shots fired were fired at Fort Sumter. But the first big battle on the ground was the First Battle of Manassas, very close to where you all learn. The South won the First Battle of Manassas because of this general. The hero of First Manassas stood like a stone wall, and that's why he got the name Stonewall Jackson. There was new technology in the Civil War. This bullet you're looking at is called a mini ball. It is shaped differently, and it has grooves which allow it to spin inside the rifling of the barrel. Bottom line, it was more accurate. It changed the way fighting was done. No more of this straight line fighting. I mean, they did it. It just didn't work out very well. These accurate bullets means new strategic types of warfare are needed. Robert E. Lee's going to be your big Southern general. You know what state he's from? Virginia. If you don't know the answer, just guess Virginia. You'll probably be right. Robert E. Lee from Virginia was against secession. He did not want to leave. But when his home state of Virginia left, so did he. And he'll be the great Confederate commander. Battle of Antietam, bloodiest single day in American history. It's in Maryland. Robert E. Lee tried to invade the North. Didn't work out because he had to go back down south after the Battle of Antietam. That little bit of success leads Abraham Lincoln to say, Antietam, freedom. He comes out with the Emancipation Proclamation after the Battle of Antietam. So what are the big points of the Emancipation Proclamation? Number one, it freed slaves in the rebelling states. Don't think it freed slaves all over the United States. It didn't. Number two, it's a war document. If you read it, oh, I'm reading the Emancipation Proclamation. It's beautiful. It's not beautiful in the sense that we think of a great poem being beautiful. It is a straight up war document. We are freeing slaves. My name is Abraham Lincoln. I'm the President of the United States. One big reason we're doing this is if we can take away the slaves, it will prevent the South's ability to fight this war. Hey, speaking of fighting this war, it allowed African Americans to join the army. Frederick Douglass pushed Abraham Lincoln and said, you got to let African Americans fight. And so the Emancipation Proclamation does that. Also, it encouraged Europe to stay out of the war. Don't help the Confederacy, because this is a war over slavery, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of that. What was military life in this like if you were a soldier? It was really scary for like the 6 days that you fought. Other than that, it was marching and boring. So soldiers wrote all kinds of letters home, describing, the harsh reality of soldier life. African Americans are also now part of military life because of the Emancipation Proclamation. Frederick Douglass urging Lincoln. Women were in the Civil War as well. They served in nursing roles. They also managed the home when resources were scarce. That means very limited because men were going away fighting. They worked in war industries in the agriculture fields as well. All right, let's go back to battles. Big battle is the Battle of Vicksburg. Vicksburg is important because of this river. That is the Mississippi River. Ulysses S. Grant, the North's best military commander, puts Vicksburg under siege. And when it finally gives in, and it does on July 4th, 1863, that means that the North has complete control of the Mississippi River. That is key. Back east at the Battle of Chancellorsville, the South wins a huge victory. but at a high cost. Stonewall Jackson rides near the line and is shot in the arm. His arm is amputated. He goes up the road about 8 miles where he dies 8 days later. So, it's a win for the South, but Lee is without his best commander. He would need his best commander at the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1 through July 3, 1863. Biggest battle of the war and most important, because Lee goes north into Pennsylvania and gets a big loss and has to go back south. He'll never go north again. The Battle of Gettysburg is the turning point of the Civil War. After the battle, Abraham Lincoln gives the Gettysburg Address. It's very short. It can be read in just over 2 minutes. The key points, the 3 key quotes are, 7 years ago. That's really fancy math term for 87 years before I'm saying this. And he said it in 1863. And that's 1776, Declaration of Independence. Our founding fathers brought forth in this continent a new nation, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We said that in 1776, and now we're showing that we actually mean it, because this is a war freeing slaves in the South. And at the very end, he says, our government is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. These ideas of democracy which cannot be lost, according to Abraham Lincoln. If you lose the war, you lose the idea. Lincoln says we are one nation held together as a union, and I'll use force if I have to. Well, you know what the other thing he'll do? He'll make Ulysses S. Grant general-in-chief. That means he's in charge of the entire Union Army, both East and West. He does this because Abraham Lincoln says all Grant does is win, baby. He needs a winner. He's had too many losers. Grant puts William Tecumseh Sherman in charge of the West, and he has his army moved west to east, destroying everything in their path. That's total war. It was called Sherman's March to the Sea. He burns Atlanta on his way to the sea. He finally gets to Savannah, and then he marches north to help Grant fight Lee. Eventually, they push Lee to surrender at Appomattox. Appomattox is in Virginia. It is where Lee surrendered to Grant. When Lee was done surrendering, his other subordinates, other Confederates, said, hey, Lee, we should fight guerrilla warfare. Let's go into the mountains for like 15, 20 years, live off the land, and keep the fight going. Lee thought, that's terrible. That will keep our country divided. Southerners, we must accept defeat. Southerners, we must move on and rejoin the Union. Robert E. Lee doesn't fight for the rest of his life. He becomes a college president at a college in Lexington, Virginia, called Washington College. Today we call that Washington and Lee. Remember, they thought, let's keep fighting. He said, no, let's surrender. So they surrenders at Appomattox. What was the impact of the war? Easy. If you were in the South, it was really bad. Farms, factories, railroads destroyed. People bitter, devastated from losing the war. But Mr. Spicer, what about the 2 big cities, Atlanta and Richmond? Those burned to the ground. Oh, I got some good Confederate money here. Throw it away. It's completely worthless. To this day, the South is one of the poorer sections of our country. And you could say that goes back to the Civil War because of the impact of losing the Civil War. And the South also is more agricultural to this day. Any factories it did have back then suffered horribly from the Civil War. Oh, but the labor source was slavery. Yeah, slavery's gone now in the South because of the Emancipation Proclamations. They lose their labor source. Tough South. South is in bad shape. The North, not so much. The North does very well. Remember, the North was industrial before the war. After the war, and it built up even more to help fight the war. So going forward in U.S. history, the U.S. is going to do pretty well industrially because of the strong northern economy that came out from the Civil War. Impact on common soldiers. Guys, over 600,000 soldiers died in the Civil War. The wounded were so many, and wounded means amputation. Soldiers lived for the rest of their life with permanent disabilities, such as losing an arm, losing a leg. They had to go back home, especially Southern soldiers, where their homes had been destroyed, and start all over. That is a sacrifice that Americans made between 1861 and 1865.